And it does look like, Miss Shannon, you are presenting
I am.
the school accountability presentation up first.
Yes. So this was a request to really talk about what does. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Real quick.
TSBA has evidently said that they want us to do that. I don't know why, but she's going to check. I'm with you, Mr. Chairman.
Fine by me.
All right, Chairman Smith.
Here.
Policy Chairwoman Schaefer.
Here.
Mrs. Black.
Here.
Mr. Connor. Mr. Doherty.
Here.
Mr. Groan.
Here.
Mrs. Haddon.
Here.
Mrs. Jones. Mr. Keene.
Here.
Mr. Slater.
Here.
Ms. Thomas. Superintendent Dr. Robertson.
Here.
Now, we will start with Miss Shannon Moody's presentation.
Yes. So this is just a quick, we're going to be talking about accountability and letter grades, kind of how data plays together into how we look at the performance of schools, and ways that we, the way that the state does it and the way that we kind of look at it differently too. So hopefully this is a good frame for some of the discussions you all want to have today. Particularly I'm thinking around, as it goes on, like board goal discussions and what we frame those around. So of course I'll fly through these, but I cannot give a presentation. One, because Fearless Leader says I can't. I'm kidding. With our just cause and our mission, vision, and goals. So all children thrive and experience a future without limits. I actually think it's really great to start a policy committee this way, thinking about what it is that we're really aiming for in every decision that we make. Our mission is to equip students with the knowledge, skills, and supports to thrive in life, and we want to see our graduates be connected, competitive, and light ready as they leave Hamilton County schools. Our values, our beliefs are actually things that drive, I think, a lot of my work. I know it drives a lot of y'all's work as well. Particularly thinking here, like, that public ed is the foundation of our community and what that means for, I think, the roles that y'all take here as well. And then our values. Our values, as Dr. Robertson says, are our habits and how we approach the work that we do. So as we go into these, we're also thinking about our commitments. When y'all are thinking about board goals as you go through, we've given options around that align to our commitments. And what do we want to see as we move forward and we stay in alignment with Opportunity 2030, which of course, as you all got to see at the State of the System, leads us to really how we're talking about our graduates, which is that vision of Hamilton County Schools and what it means to be a graduate of Hamilton County Schools. So I wanted to just make sure, I think y'all got to get this from me a little bit before. You watch me nerd out when I start to talk about data, so you're just gonna have to put up with me. But talking about achievement and growth. So there's a lot of numbers that get thrown around in educational data, but there's two really important pieces that we really think about when we talk about how are kids learning in our schools. And so achievement and growth solidified for me when we talked about the running track, right? You think about the running track and there's a starting point and a finish point on the track. That's what I think of as achievement. Students line up right on the starting line for second grade. They run the track throughout the year as they're learning, and we're measuring how many kids cross the finish line with mastery of standards, right? That would be so perfect as the only measure needed in all of education if every kid started on the starting line, right? Does every kid start on the starting line? No, right? We all know that. We've all been close enough to know this, that kids start all over the track, right? So there are some kids that start on the starting line. There's some kids that start half a loop ahead on the track. There's some that start 3 loops back on the track, right? And so to measure a kid that's half a loop ahead and if they're crossing the finish line, that's not the same as measuring a kid that's 3 loops back and then crossing the finish line, right? So achievement is how many cross the finish line. Growth is essentially erasing the finish line and saying, did every student, regardless of where they started, make a whole loop around the track? And so when you put those together with educational data, it actually gives us a more full picture around what's happening in a school. Not only are kids crossing the finish line, but everyone's at least making a loop around the track. The loop around the track is what, like, the growth is TVOS. So when you hear a TVOS level 3, that's like one loop. When you hear a 4 or 5, that's more than one loop. And a 1 or 2 is not quite making the full loop. It's not that they didn't learn anything, but they didn't make it all the way around to their finish line. They lost a little bit of ground. How does that? Yes. I
It's a
think
good
that's a really
analogy.
important piece as we go through and looking at these. The other piece about achievement and growth that really takes a minute for us to understand when we look at it is that there are plenty of scenarios, and we'll actually look at one in our own data, where you can increase in proficiency and decline in growth. Or the other way around. You can grow substantially and decline in proficiency. So this is just an illustration, right? Every little smiley face on here is representing a kid from one year to the next. And some kids, like you can see, their smiley face moves forward, moves up in achievement. Some kids, their smiley face moves down in achievement. What's represented as this group is that if you look at how many kids cross that finish line, if we think about the track, there are more kids crossing the finish line in 23, 24 in this example than there are in 22, 23. Right? So proficiency increased. But what did the whole group do?
It went down.
It went down, right? So that's an example of what you can see in data, right? So when we look at our own data here, we looked at things like proficiency and growth. You'll always see me put proficiency and growth if we have both measures, because it gives us a more true picture of what's going on. So you see things like our achievement in ELA and math has been steadily increasing. From 23 to 24, we went from just a little bit increasing, but 37.6 to 37.8 when you put both of those together, right?
Shannon, what data do we use to get those?
Oh, such a good question. That's all off of the TCAP test at the end of the year. Yep. So it's one test score, but looking at that test score in two different ways. Looking at math here is a real life example of what we just looked at theoretically on a slide, right? We saw our math proficiency increase from one year to the next, going from 35.8% to 36.6%. But when we look at our math growth, we actually see a level 1, which means our kids didn't make a whole loop around the track. So having half of that story is really misleading, right? If you're only looking at achievement, you think we're doing outstanding in math. If you only look at growth, you think we're doing terrible in math, right? But when you look at them together, it starts to paint the picture of what's really happening in instruction. That there are students moving forward, but there are pockets of students, or as a whole, maybe are not, and we're gonna have to be thinking about what are those ways to reach our students. You guys have seen this, but this is just a screenshot of Opportunity 2030. We choose to look at a really, really wide array of metrics and take this approach to say, how are we looking at multiple pieces of data to understand if we're moving students forward, if all students are learning? We believe in our own strategic plan that we have to look at things, multiple measures, and we have to look at it among groups of students to really make sure that all children thrive and experience a future without limits.
Okay, question here. Why don't we have like the top performing students on here that we're tracking? Why is it not a category?
Why did we not make a category in terms of like highest performing students?
For growth purposes.
With these categories have been aligned to what historically has been federal and state accountability. And so we do always get the choices to make what it is that we're looking at. We can track any data any way, right?
Can I request we add?
Sure, we can pull that data for you to see what is that looking like among growth and achievement too. The full picture. Oh, but we look at things in all different ways, right? Because we believe that having the more full picture you can look at, the better story it is telling of what you're doing in terms of learning. So you'll see things like TCAP, right? And growth. You'll see also we're putting in a K2 metric because we really want to understand TCAP doesn't start till 3rd grade, but we believe it's a true measure of our schools to see how our students are doing in K2 areas and early literacy, which you all have said is a huge priority for this board. And then we're looking at self-efficacy, if students believe in their own ability to learn, right? We know that's kind of a foundational piece, and we've got to see that in order to really see learning happen. So the question, I give you guys all this background. It's like asking for the time and being told how the clock works, right? I guess that's not the question I was asked. But the question is about A through F grading and what does that mean for us? State of Tennessee, I actually worked at the State Department when they were developing the original A through F accountability model. And that accountability model, what you can see on here, was made up of multiple measures, right? There's a lot of pieces to this pie that helped us figure out how is a school performing and where do we need to really look at. But you can see that achievement and growth were always the biggest pieces of the pie. This never launched. We had many, many years, but they never ran, I think probably for a lot of political reasons, A through F off of this model. Instead, they changed the model, right? So it's much, much fewer pieces. We had the opportunity to participate in a lot of feedback sessions. Quite honestly, you all know me now. I was very vocal in those feedback sessions. Many people were. This model that you see in front of you was not what was recommended to the state. It didn't matter. That's still what they went with, right? And so that is a piece of this story. What you see here is they're looking at achievement, growth, and then growth of the bottom 25% is the gray area. And then high schools also add in college and career readiness. Here's a piece of data that I think is really critical to why we were having these discussions with the state, right? We've talked about growth and achievement and how it's important to have both metrics and as many metrics as you can see and understand what the metrics are telling you. What this here is a really fun scatter plot that I promise I will explain easily to know what you're looking at. Every dot on this screen is a school in the state of Tennessee. So every single yellow dot is a school. The top one is measuring growth against economic status, so the poverty level of the school. The further dot is to the left means that that school has very little poverty. The further the dot is to the right means that school has almost 100% poverty. Right? And what you see on this is that there's no real correlation. Like y'all are thinking back to those math classes with me where you have the slope and the correlation, right? There's a straight line across this. There's no real pattern. You can be a high poverty school or a low poverty school and show growth or not growth, right? So there's no correlation here. When you look at achievement, which is just how many kids cross the finish line, there is a correlation. We see that students in schools with less poverty have higher achievement rates than students in schools with high level of poverty. So the data that we're looking at actually does indicate that there are barriers that exist for students in poverty that have to do with are they getting across that finish line, but don't have to do with are they making a loop around that track. And this is not new data. I just put this slide in here as well. This is the same exact chart from 2008, right? This is data that exists time over time that shows us that growth and poverty have no correlation, but achievement and poverty do. So it has to be something that's in our minds when we look at this data, that if we look at achievement alone, what are we really measuring for a school versus if we look at achievement and growth together?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
And so that's 2008 versus the other one that's 16 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a whole lot more schools that are at the very close to the 100% poverty level. What happened in Tennessee that brought them back?
This one is measuring free and reduced lunch. This one is measuring economically
got it.
disadvantaged. We changed what the measure of poverty was in our schools, essentially.
I was just wondering,
Yeah,
because that was a significant difference in
It
a very
is.
small amount of time. So.
you're right.
Okay.
So then when you look at growth and achievement, this is one I always have to put in here because it's my little soapbox, so I won't stay on it long. There's no correlation either, right? And the point here is a lot of times we hear when it starts talking about growth, well, our highest performing schools can't grow. Not actually true, right? Our highest performing school in the state of Tennessee, these are not actually percentages of achievement, these are kind of on a curve. They have high growth, right? That line that you're seeing is kind of level 3 growth. It's that one loop around the track. So any dot above the line is like a 4 or 5. Any dot below the line is a 1 or a 2. So schools across achievement levels can all grow. This is a model out of what would happen in A through F grades if you look mostly at absolute proficiency. Right? So we've looked at that correlation on the line. schools would receive, a blue is kind of showing you, I'm sorry, the colors are showing you the poverty rate. So it's another way to look at this. Blue is very low poverty, red is kind of high poverty. This is across the state. The success rate, essentially, the grades are showing that if you have higher poverty, you'd have a lower success rate or a lower grade, right? Versus lower poverty, you'd have a higher grade. If we take multiple measures into account, those color bands go away. You can see schools with low poverty get higher grades. Schools with high poverty get higher grades. So we know that multiple measures really matter when it comes to grades. What we know that happened with the state of Tennessee is that they actually took these pieces away, right? We have much, much fewer measures. So we're not looking at student groups anymore. We're just looking at all students together, which narrows our measures down and really kind of masks some of the issues that we're seeing in schools. We're not taking targets anymore. So I know I jumped on an email, Mr. Groen. I'm sorry. I was sitting in a meeting trying to jump on it really quickly. But targets are something that we've always looked at to say, okay, maybe it's going to take several years to get to a high level of proficiency. Are you meeting some really aggressive targets along the way? We took those away too, right? So there's some real issues that I think we see in the grading system. Either way, it is the grades that our students have, right? And I just think it's really important for that context. And I realize this is too small, so I put in another one. I meant to hide these, I'm so sorry. But you have these as reference. This is actually the grades that came out for every school in our district, chunked by if it was an A, B, C, D, or an F. So you can keep this as reference, and I can give you a bigger version too. I just couldn't figure out how to make it succinct and big on here. But you can see which schools fell into the A category, B, or C, and then where they scored highest, whether it was achievement or growth. We would expect to see, right, those A schools, incredible things happening. There's high achievement, there's high growth for the students in the bottom 25%. This is what the state is weighting as part of the grade, right? You start to see those trends change. There are some really interesting anomalies. This has the D's and F's for you all as well, and how you can start to see those color trends change too. I don't have the most recent version. Oh, there's a really good one, and I must have put it in too late, Miss Shirley. Is this on Google Slides, or is this a PDF version? Okay. Well, I'm going to use an example up here, and then I will get you all the slides. I think it's really helpful. So there's an example that I put in there that's a case of two schools that really helps us see this, right? There's a school with high poverty with an achievement rate of 23%. And then when we started to look at the data measures, these are actually our schools, right? Achievement rate of 23%. The previous year, they were at 11%. So we know that their target, if they were going to hit a really great target, if the state still did those, was to be somewhere at about 21%. This school achieved 23%, going from 11 to 23 in 1 year, right? They had level 5 growth, level 5 for the bottom 25% on all those measures. What would you all think of that school? Is that a great?
Yeah, because they're doing great with the
Right.
kids that they have.
Right, the instruction that's happening at school from every data point that we can see is a really, really great instruction. That school received a B. Okay? And that's because their achievement, although it went from 11 to 23, is still at 23, which is important, right? But I mean, going from 11 to 23, which is incredible, still kept them from being an A-level school under the grading period. Then we have a school that's a high poverty. I think I said it backwards. That one was a high poverty rate. This one is a low poverty rate, right, in elementary school as well. They went from, I think it was 63% to 64.8%, so they increased in proficiency, right? Their target, if they were going to hit that, like, how much do you need to be forward, is actually to be closer to 67, so they didn't quite meet their target. And their TVOS growth was a 2. Their growth for the lowest 25% was also a 2, right? What would you think about that school?
But it's still a good school.
Students are crossing the finish line, right?
Yes.
What? Thinking about that track, why are they crossing the finish line?
Because they started out further up the track.
Because they started out further up the track, right? So that school is also a B. And so my what I want us to know about letter grades as we're thinking about all of these things is they are sometimes intended to be misleading. Right? At least in Shannon's opinion.
I have a
yes,
question.
And I'm like wrapping it up here for you. Because it's one little piece of a puzzle that when we know the context of the school and when we really say, what do we want to be saying at a school, it's not always getting at that piece. And so really thinking about what is it that we're valuing and measuring to make sure that every student is growing and we're hitting our beliefs and values through this as well. Sorry, Mr. Grimm. Go ahead.
Oh,
I'm done.
no, okay. Now, on this chart,
Uh-huh.
I'm making sure, the GR 25 is a growth for the bottom 25%?
Yes. Yep.
And the CCR is a cumulative?
College and career readiness.
Okay,
So
college.
only high schools will have that.
And then the letter grade, instead of A, B, you've actually put it on a 4-point scale, correct?
That's how the state does it. Yep.
Okay.
So this is exactly how the state decided to do their methodology. They give a score for each one of those indicators, get an average, and then the average is aligned to what a grade would be.
This was off
So
the
here-
.gov
Yes.
website, yeah.
So here's my question. We're seeing growth.
Yeah.
So we see a high TVOS score. Let's say a school grows at 5 or 6 points every year, but they started at 20%. So let's say we've got a 5th grader and they're at 20 or 23%, and for the next 6 years they only increase 5 or 6 percentage points a year. That's tremendous growth, sustained growth over a long period of time, but we're still looking at only that maybe we get to 50% of the students at that graduation level that are going to graduate can actually read, write, and do math at grade level.
Oh, you bring up a great point, right?
So I knew
Yeah.
you would want to pick on that.
And this is my other soapbox, so I'm gonna keep it low because we have a long night ahead of us, I know. Mastery on a test doesn't mean what you can read or not read. That finish line doesn't mean magically you can read if you cross the finish line and you can't read if you don't. I'll use my own daughter as an example. She's been a reader since 5th grade. We barely, 5 years old, right, or kindergarten. We barely passed the 3rd grade test, right? But, I mean, if you all knew my daughter, I need to make sure you meet her. She can read beautifully. And so it's not just about, sometimes we simplify it a little bit and say, if you don't pass the test, you can't read. And so we're graduating kids that can't read. I actually would push back on that a little bit. Now, do I want her to get further in her mastery? Absolutely, right? She has got to master that content, and it's incredibly important. But I know to get there, she has to keep making more than that loop around the track to keep moving forward in that mastery.
And the reason I ask you this is that my master's thesis was on readability before textbooks ever did this. And anyway, so what was happening is that as these students moved on in life, whatever they did, that their ability to really remember or handle complicated text with lots of syllables in the vocabulary had a direct impact based upon what they could really read. So it was an interesting study, and I did this because teachers were like making copies out of Time and Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report and handing them, to their students to, put a real reality to what they were learning from the textbook. But the vast majority of these articles were at grade 14 to grade 20. And as soon as you cross that threshold, the understanding of that material was severely compromised. So you can push back, but it's going to it could have and might have an impact, and probably does have an impact on their ability over time. But then you're looking at the experiential, the experience that
you're
they
probably
get.
getting me into more what I love.
Yeah, I know.
more
You
than
and I
today,
would-
but yeah, we should connect
Yeah.
on it for sure.
Yeah, we would geek out over all this stuff. So I
Ms.
just,
Shannon, I'm looking at my
Yeah.
schools, and with the explanation you gave, with
Yes.
poverty not having an effect on growth,
Yes.
my lowest poverty school has a 1 in growth and only a 3 in achievement, but the achievement is higher than the growth. So, and the lower 25% growth was at a 2, but the school overall was a 1. So those are the kind of things that are really alarming to me, even based on what you're saying. Whereas, again, then my middle school, they have 5s on their achievement and their bottom 25% growth. But the school overall growth was 3. But again, there should be no correlation, based on what you're saying, to poverty. So it's the growth that I'm very much concerned about.
Yeah. And yes, I think that's a good piece here. And I put this back up on the screen too, just as that's my reference point, what happens in my brain when we see things like, ooh, that growth is declining in a particular year. That group of students, while many may be over the finish line, may have moved backwards not moved backwards, not made the whole loop around the track as a whole.
What can we do? What are we doing to address that for the next, we have TCAPs coming?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have comprehensive, we have a comprehensive plan around instruction. So, I mean, I could go from high-quality instructional materials in every single classroom. I could go through enrichment opportunities that kids have across all grade bands. I could go to response to intervention in, tier 2 and tier 3 spaces, right? All of those pieces coming together around, high-quality teaching and learning, all of those pieces are what we're doing to move the whole. I love that you're talking about growth, because for us, we talk about growth all the time, and you do notice some really high-achieving schools that have 1s, right? They'll have a 5 in achievement and a 1 in growth. We have those conversations all the time and are trying to support them in understanding how to measure growth and get to the root of why the kids aren't growing in their space. It is a learning curve, I would say, for Hamilton County. I mean, I would say I wasn't here 8 years ago, but my understanding is that for a very long time, we didn't look deeply at data achievement or growth, right? So now we're trying to elevate standards, elevate achievement, elevate growth, and suggest that every single kid should grow. One of the things that we've done over the last couple of years, but really doubled down on this year, and I said this to you earlier, the state of Tennessee runs a prediction for every single kid. So it goes, if I'm a 10th grader, it looks all the way back to my 3rd grade, and it says what I should be able to do on this test. So let's say I'm projected to be proficient, and I, on benchmark 2, show approaching. The teachers in that school can see that, the principals in that school can see that, and they can start to have conversations. Why is Sonia, who's been proficient year over year, not? What are our plans for her? What are the plans for reteaching? What are the plans to get her to where she should be? They also could see if I'm a kid who's below, and let's say I am proficient. Now Sonia, who was projected to be below, is proficient. What's happening for her that's getting her there? But we're looking at this data by standards, by cohorts, by classes, but all the way to the individual level, trying to really help our teachers understand where growth is. And every single kid should, at the very least, do what their prediction says they can do, because it's based on, my data is based on me. Shannon's data is based on her. So all that individual data doesn't take care of anybody else. It's what I've already shown I can do. At the very least, we should be doing that. And so those conversations are happening, and those teaching plans, I would say individualized plans are existing.
I want to say I'm seeing that more this semester, particularly in my middle school, where my daughter, after that second benchmark, that they finally put in for like the ELA, they've put them over. It used to be study hall. She used to just do her homework.
Yeah.
Now they've pulled them to probably the top teacher in that grade, who's doing extra work with it. One, she loves it. She's like, we're reading novels, we're doing, like, loves it.
Sure.
But I wish we had started that maybe after the first benchmark.
So I think one of the things you're pointing out, from a systems level for me, what I'm trying to do is say, here's all the practices that we know are good for schooling. Here's the data. What I didn't say to East Ham is create enrichment for your highest performers. I say to the principals, you need to look at your data, and where you have kids not performing, we need strategies. And in a data analysis protocol, we actually say they actually write down what they're gonna do to respond, but they all don't respond the exact same way. We have another middle school who's really struggling in math, and it's really standards alignment. They're just not teaching all of the standards, and it's a high-performing school, and so for them, it's not an enrichment group. We need to do some standards deconstruction, unpack standards, and do a better job aligning our teaching to the standards. Does that make sense? So for us, I'm elevating. There's any number of ways we could get at this, but we should be responding to the data in a way that's appropriate for the kids in our building.
Are we only looking at it after second benchmark, though, or are we looking after first?
We have a data analysis protocol after each benchmark.
Okay.
So we're benchmarking right now. The data will be
Right.
back over spring break. We have data meetings all day on the 24th.
Yeah, we're
So-
benchmarking all week, I know.
But yeah, that data analysis protocol all the way across the benchmarks. And then of course, when we go into action planning in the summer, when we start to get our achievement data back comes in the summer, and then our growth data, we're responding to that on a larger cycle in the action planning, if that makes sense. So we do these short cycles around benchmarks and a longer cycle around action planning.
Okay, thank you. Do they come in, they go bottom up, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Top down? Jill Black.
Hi. So you said that what the state is measuring has changed and that we've dropped a lot of like subgroups or whatever. What could that look like year over year for those kids that we were measuring their growth and making sure that like every subgroup was making gains and going in the right direction? If we ignore those subgroups now, what is that going to do to our data? And what could that look like year over year?
Yeah, so it's part of this. Just because the state pulled it off doesn't mean that we do it Hamilton County. And so I think part of our Opportunity 2030 plan is that we still continue to look at student groups and disaggregate this data in a bunch of different ways.
Because the data's still there.
Because the data's still there. Yep, we can still disaggregate that data.
And all the way in our benchmarks. Our benchmarks are reported out just like this. You can see every single student group, so you can see if one group is trending a certain way.
I'm glad to hear that, because the thing that I get most excited about when I see these charts is the schools that are getting fives in the growth of the bottom 25%, because that means that like everybody's coming up and everybody's making gains. And like, you know, if we can get the kids who are the most struggling or start the furthest behind to grow, I think year over year, that's where we see the biggest gains and like getting us to the next level. Thank you.
Miss Jackie?
Can you explain to me the concept that I hear often from people in the education system, because I don't understand this, when they say, if you're at the bottom, you can't do anything but go up? Like if you're at 1, you can't do anything. Next year you be higher because you can't go any lower than 1. So I guess my question is, do they stand still, or is that true in what they say? You can only go up because you're at the bottom.
I mean, not really. It's much more nuanced than that, right?
Okay.
I mean, if we're boiling it down to ease of understanding of 1, 2, 3, 4, there's no score lower than a 1, right? But one thing, like Sonia brought up, was the projections for each individual student. And so that's where we get that granular into the data to say every student, right? You watch me intentionally say, it's not that they're moving backwards, they're not making their full loop around the track. Every student is learning throughout the school year, but we want to make sure they make it all the way around. And so that getting more nuanced into the data to see how are they going towards their projection, did they just miss it, were they way far off, allows us to get more granular into that movement. But no, I mean, our belief is that every student can learn, right? And we hold that as the belief, and it's true in any data that we're looking at, that there is more than just, hey, I can't go anywhere but up, right? You can actually go both ways, honestly.
I'm going to take it a step further. When she talks about getting more granular, our benchmark data, that 1, 2, 3, 4, is actually divided into 12 pieces. So there's a 1 minus, a 1, a 1 plus, a 2 minus, a 2, a 2 plus, all the way through. So our 1 minus kids are obviously at the bottom. Any of those minus categories, 1 minus, 2 minus, 3 minus, 4 minus, we actually don't count those kids as actually meeting their proficient, or meeting their projection, if that makes sense. So if you're a 1- kid and you stay at 1-, you don't meet projection. If you get to 1, you've moved forward. So our point being, you have to be solidly in your projection to count in our benchmarks in your projection, if that makes sense. So we're constantly at the very small level noticing even little things. If you go from a 3 to a 3-, you're still proficient. You still made it around the track, but you went backwards, right? And so we want to make sure you're solidly a 3 and going forward. So we're looking at those nuances too. So to the kids at the very, very bottom, we're paying a lot of attention to those 1-, and even if they go from a 1 to 1-, we're constantly moving them in those ways.
Thank you.
Joe Smith?
I may have misunderstood, but
You may not have.
you said something a while ago, I think, if I heard you right, that's troubling.
Okay.
I think I heard you say that this system was created to deceive.
It can be deceiving.
So, but isn't that what you said?
Yes. Yes.
So,
letting her personal feelings come in.
Yes. I became Shannon for a minute and not Miss Moody out here, right? I mean, you all know this, right? There are always politics at play, and school data can be used in all different kinds of ways. And I think there can
well, I
be
guess I'm a
wonderful
little
pieces.
naive. Why?
So I'll speak plainly. I've got pretty strong feelings about this. This system has been, I think that the law was passed in 2015 or somewhere around there, give or take. And the principal at the time, I was super involved and paid attention to it because it mattered. Because the public doesn't pay attention to the nuances. They pay attention to the A or the F, right? And so they don't dig into what it's actually saying about your school. And so it mattered the methodology that went to getting to that A and F. We spent years, I mean, to the point of probably 18 months. This was when Candace McQueen was the Commissioner of Education, trying to determine what the methodology to get to that letter grade would be. Right? That's where you saw ELPA, you saw chronic absenteeism was one of the indicators. Finally got to that place. Everybody's all excited, going to run letter grades. Don't run them. Haven't run them since then, right? Last year, a new Commissioner of Education was named. The very first thing she picked up was letter grades. Went on a tour. You can go still look at them on YouTube. We had our session here in this part of the region over at the old Cigna building. And in every one of those public meetings across the state, people were saying either don't do this yet or use the old methodology. But the whole meeting was around changing the methodology, right? I don't think we even went into the specifics of achievement. In the old methodology, it wasn't just absolute achievement. There was, the AMO that you could hit and also hit your achievement measure. That's completely gone now. It is just absolute achievement, right? This is Justin speaking. This is my opinion, is that it is not a coincidence that we've had a law on the books for over 7 years that has never actually been enacted until the same year that we start having a conversation about universal scholarships. That was last year. It's the first time we've had that conversation at the state. To put, no, not TISA, the vouchers. I was calling them scholarships to be correct. Right. It is not a coincidence that the same year that we start that conversation is the very first year that we actually implement a law that's been in place for almost a decade, right?
So that's why Shannon is saying.
That's right.
Why you're saying.
Yes.
That there's political motive. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so naive. I
You put a letter grade, and what I would,
see that.
what we're trying to push here is, and I think it's good for the board to have this conversation, is what do we believe a healthy school looks like? What are the measures that go into it? And recognize that Many of you weren't on here when we approved Opportunity 2030, but we have a lot of metrics in there. I think it's more important for this board to say, what do we believe about healthy schools? Let's put our metrics, and we can actually run a scorecard ourselves, send it to the Times Free Press, and put what we think about schools. But the politics came into play, and we took this all the way to the state board, and I want to be clear publicly, the state board did not vote on this. The Department of Education unilaterally created, the metrics and what went into setting this grade.
Well, the state board opposed it.
Yeah, the state board opposed it.
Interesting.
Sorry, it was a rant.
Well,
It's very interesting.
I need to hear that. I was too, I wouldn't have, I'm just too naive, I guess. I wouldn't have thought that.
Mr. Slater?
Thanks, Jody. And Jody, I don't think you're naive, buddy. There's got to be a different way to measure a technical school. So I'm looking at Sequoia. We got a 5 on the college and career readiness. So these kids are coming out and they're ready to work, but yet they've got a 2 and a 1 and a 1. There's got to be a different way to measure that school and other schools like that. Has that been discussed?
Yeah. Not our decision. I mean, yes, well, I 100% agree with you.
Okay.
If they have a
that-
school number.
Yeah, but because they have a school number. Now, the adjustment that we're making to Sequoia, it won't get a letter grade now, because it won't be technically a school number. But your point is exactly what we're saying, is like there's so much more that goes into like what creates a healthy school. And when you're graduating almost every kid that is college or career ready, it just happens that they are career ready.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing something right.
Right. Okay.
Ms. Black?
I wanted to go back to the letter grade thing. So let me know if I'm on the right track. So our current letter grade system that we're using focuses primarily on achievement only. Achievement has correlations with poverty. So, but they're not showing any sort of like measurement for growth or like kids are moving in the right direction
No,
or
it's in
anything.
there.
Nope, they are, here it is up on the screen.
Okay.
Yep. So it's weighted most heavily for achievement, although the second highest is growth, which we do agree with, right?
Right.
To be clear, achievement and growth together. What it does is it sets kind of a ceiling when you only use absolute achievement. So what we opposed when we were going through this process was the use of only absolute achievement and not things like targets as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they increased it to 50% in the original one. If you go back another slide, achievement wasn't 50% anywhere else.
Okay.
So, but even if on the current one, if they had done AMOs, we would have been more in favor, even though we still think maybe this is too high on achievement. But if it had been AMOs, we would have been
Right.
more supportive, right?
What AMO stands
So annual measurable objective.
Thank
So it's
you.
what Shannon was saying, where a school that's at 25% ELA this year, the state used to set a target, say next year you have to be at 29. And if you met that target, you got your points for achievement, so to speak, even though
Gotcha.
you weren't at 60.
Instead of straight up
That's right,
achievement.
instead of-
Okay.
Yes.
So if you met your targets, whether it was at like strict achievement or not, you met your
That's right.
goals.
And our schools, in their action plans, our data team runs AMOs for them. They actually have, like, if you got this year, this is a reasonable goal for you to get next year based
Right.
on all the data science. So they all have that. So when he says we can do a scorecard, we know if they've met what we would consider the appropriate level of achievement. And some schools are setting double AMO goals. The state used to reward that too. So we're still looking at it, what's the right amount of achievement growth we should expect? But with the absolute achievement, you can go backwards. You could be 67% proficient this year, 64% next year, and still be an A in achievement or a 5 in achievement.
Right. Okay. So that's kind of what my previous question was getting at, is like when we're not measuring the same, what's that going to look? Is that going to have a negative impact on our students over time? And what you're saying is it could, because you can't achieve what you're not measuring.
From the state list.
from the state list.
We
Yeah.
are still showing our
Sure.
data that's aligned to our values. So we're looking at student groups, we're looking at the whole, does that make sense? We're
Yes.
looking against their AMOs, so to speak, the internal targets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the public reads the newspaper and they see this school has this grade from the state, and we're saying, no, this school has this achievement and they've done all of this, this is going to show a conflict in narrative possibly. Okay. Because that can be confusing if you don't get the nuance. Because most people don't sit down and watch policy meetings, honestly. Like, most people don't have time to do that. Not that we're not doing great work. But it's something that can be lost in the conversation with the public, and the public can have a certain perception of where our schools are and where they're going versus what's really happening. Okay.
Could we, in focusing on our growth, not start to change that narrative a little bit more?
100%. And I would say that this district has been focused on growth for several years, but we're still just moving that direction. But I think your original point, we should want every single kid, no matter what their achievement level is, to grow. We should want every school to be a level 3 or higher. And that is our desire, right? That every kid grows. So if you're in a high-performing school academically, we want every kid in that building to grow.
So strategically, you said you don't tell the principals what to do. Is it more, we should have more of those conversations strategically
The way
to
it
help
hap-
them know?
The way it happens, the principals and the community superintendents will talk about their plans moving forward and the accountability and why it works. We're constantly doing the continuous improvement model, plan, do, check, act. So school starts off and this is our plan. They get to benchmark 1. Did you do it? Did it happen? Did it not? Why not? What do we need to adjust? So we're constantly in that space. It's tricky, like what's loose and what's tight. For my seat, we have to have a plan, and we have to have rationale for that plan, and we have to evaluate that plan on short cycles to know if it's working. Most of my history has been in high poverty schools. In those schools, what you need are tighter cycles. You can't wait 9 weeks. Every 4 weeks, you got to have a real idea because you got so much to do. Does that make sense? And so having those cycles of continuous improvement where you adjust based on the data is the most important thing. So what we are holding principals accountable to is to the evaluation of their decision, program, whatever they're doing, and the adjustment if it's not working. That we do hold them accountable to.
Okay. Ben?
Thank you, Jody. Just to clarify, as it pertains to letter grades with respect to achievement and growth, what is used to measure that is the TCAP
Yes.
results?
Mm-hmm.
Correct, okay. And then, and Jody, I'm sorry if you already asked this and it was answered. Regarding higher performing students, could one say that, like, if a child's at a 97% or whatever the measurement is, that growth, even though they're still learning, that technically would not be measured within the TCAP results. Does that make
Favorite
sense?
question.
It is my favorite question. Don't ask me my favorite questions. So TCAP actually scales with a really high ceiling, right? That's
Right.
part of the test design. And so there are very, very, very few that get all the way to that piece as well. There's a lot of nuance in the measure of the test. But with TVOS in particular, talking about growth, it's easy to talk about it in terms of percentile, right? And say, oh, my kid's in the 99th percentile, there's nowhere they can go. It actually is measured with things called NCEs, or normal curve equivalents, which they're gonna laugh because I do this more than I need to. But a percentile is like a bell curve where most kids are in the center at the 50% and very few are at the edges, and so it's hard to measure the edges. NCEs takes that bell curve and steps on it and squashes it flat so that everything's even. So growth from 97 to 99 is the same as growth from, I should have used 5 numbers.
Yeah.
90
Use
to
some odd
95
numbers.
is the same as 50 to 55 is the same as 20 to 25, right? So they're taking those measures into account and those stats into account to look at growth. Now, our highest performing district in the state of Tennessee is at about 70, is maybe their max, 70% proficient.
Overall?
Mm-hmm.
I answer this question a little bit differently than Shannon, and I'm slightly wrong in the data, but I think it's easier to understand. So if you got a 97 last year, what you're expected to do this year is 94 to 99. You actually could perform slightly below what you did last year and still be at a 3, 4, or 5. They band it, right? So it doesn't mean 97 you have to get a 98, 98 you have to get a 99. There's actually a band. We don't grade out like that, but that is true too. It is not actually the mark. There's a band that if you landed that band, you have done your full lap around the track. You're a 3, 4, 4, or 5.
So then it's fair to say, based off what you're saying with flattening the bell curve, there is still benefit for a child that's at a 90 to go to a 95, right? That's still
Yes.
captured. So then my question, and maybe along the lines of what Jody was already hitting at, is when we talk about RTI, you know, we typically focus on the bottom 25 percentile, right? Are we also doing the same thing for the top 25 percentile if we are able to achieve outcomes based off these grading metrics? Do we ever talk about that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the
Okay.
question that Jody asked.
That was your point?
So-
That is exactly my point,
Yeah.
is I want to make sure that we are doing more of that for not just the lower. I want it for them,
Yeah.
but I want it for all
So something more
students.
universal?
Yeah.
Because Thrasher does a great job. And then we can keep moving on, sorry. But reading-wise, the teacher gave him a special book with approved material that he could read outside the classroom. And he brought a book home, and I thought it was my wife's book. I was like, geez, this thing is huge. So it's things like that are great to see, and to maybe Jody's point, would be nice to see across.
And schools do that across the board. It hasn't been dictated in these specific ways. Like, nobody told Thrasher to give books and send them home, right? We tell our principals we need to make sure that every single kid in our building is performing, and when you have high-performing kids, we need to be extending their learning, we need to be enriching, and how they do that, we trust the educators to do.
I would just say that's why we have to have really good leaders, guys.
It's that, but it's, you know, the curriculum matters, right? Having really good, high-quality curriculum, setting high expectations, the quick cycles of feedback, and it's that balance of like coherence and a little bit of autonomy, right? Of how schools operate differently. I think it's I'll in my part of saying this, Mike Winstead's the superintendent of Maryville Public Schools. It's who I think you were talking about. I think Maryville is usually the highest performing, and I've heard him multiple times, even speaking to the commissioner on this topic of, even in the highest performing districts, he holds schools more accountable to growth than he does achievement.
Ms. Felice?
Yep. One example, having been a teacher for many years, as far as on those TCAT tests, as a teacher, I knew that there were questions on there that no one's probably going to get. So they do have other more challenging questions that maybe the teacher hasn't covered or anything. So it does allow cushions. And when you do the grade, it's not just a straight percentage off the questions. They scale it. So that's how they can leave room for people to grow. If so, also, you know, as far as growing, a lot of it, as Dr. Robertson said, is the curriculum. You know, students who are taking more challenging classes and the instruction that they're getting in those classes. So.
Well, grade level curriculum is our foundation for anything. You start by teaching the standards at grade level, and then you remediate where needed and extend where needed. But that's getting everybody at grade level curriculum.
And I guess I'm thinking on the high school level too, for, you know, as far as you're taking more advanced courses. That's just.
Mr. Smith?
Even though we're not measuring anymore, because I heard you say that we're not measuring those cohorts, those subgroups.
The state isn't, we are.
We are, but the state's not. And the state's one that's assigning the letter grades. If you look at the D's and the F's in our district, high number of economically disadvantaged kids.
Yes, sir. It's designed to do that, actually.
Can you elaborate on that?
And
Well,
Shannon's
the-
opinion.
the narrative of vouchers was what?
was about if I'm in a failing school, I can go somewhere else.
Right, so the easiest way to show failing schools is by ensuring that high poverty schools have an F, right? And so you put this model that leans in that direction. And I'm not saying, we've got some outliers. East Side Elementary is a little bit of an outlier, but when only one school is getting out of the bottom, like that tells you the system is actually producing exactly what it was intended to produce.
No, you didn't. Turn it on.
Well, I mean, I just.
Yeah, I look at Hardy. Hardy Elementary is our most economically disadvantaged school, and it's a C this year, and they are achievement level 1. They are our lowest performing in proficiency, highest economically disadvantaged, lowest performing in proficiency, but they got a level 5 growth for the first time in more than a decade. It's tremendous, and a level 3 in their bottom 25%. I mean, this is against all odds, and under the last system, they would be an A.
What are they doing that's unique?
All high quality teachers, grade level curriculum. They have a lot of interventionists and RTI plans that are great. Their leader is who we just promoted to the elementary director position. Phenomenal leader who'd been there for 7 years, so sustained leadership over time, high retention rate with those teachers, really quality RTI 2B plans, so high expectations for kids and behavior. I'd love to take you to Hardy. Hardy is, I mean, it's a joy. I mean, they're just killing it. But the level 1 is, their achievement rates are still really low. Some in the single digits low, but they're just moving those kids. And they're growing in enrollment. Like the word has gotten out around that neighborhood. Parents are taking their kids to Hardy because of the learning experience kids are having there. And yet their achievement is low.
And they're over 80% economically.
Yeah, they're our highest, 83% when I looked at it a little while ago. I don't know what it is right now.
Miss Felice?
I just want to confirm, as far as the previous model, it still accounted for growth, but a less amount, and now a lot more is for achievement than was before. But it still accounted for some growth.
Yes.
Okay.
But again,
but
remember
under
the
that
achievement-
model,
the achievement had two pathways, the absolute and then the AMOs, where this just is absolute.
So just cross 60%, you get this number. 40%, you get this number. Rather than if you grow by 4.
Okay.
Any other questions on this? Okay.
If I can take a slight point of privilege, it is also a joy to talk academics with y'all, to talk data. So anytime you want to do this, I think we could do much more of it.
I know you must be the best at it.
All right, so we're going to move into our policy reviews. And I'm going to just go down the line. You have some added that we'll do at the end, but we'll start with opening your book here. 2.101, duties of school system employees. There was minor changes, really just to the language of director of schools on line 28 and 29. Any comments? Having heard none, let's go on. 2.200, annual operating budget. So there's a slight change of verbiage on lines 26 and 27, some capitalization on lines 34. Any comments?
Yes, ma'am. Line 39, 38, 39, we may want to consider, I don't know why 45 days is specified there. We've never met 45 days. I don't know, Scott, if that's something we just chose or what.
No, it's not.
But something to consider if that's required or if that's just what we put in there. Typically, obviously, we do it before the commission votes on it, but it's not been 45 days since I've been here.
Pull out your code.
April
Check
or
the
May.
code.
Here, it's always been the April meeting.
Checking the code, hold on.
We don't have to check now. We can get on second read.
Okay.
I just, well, kind of asked.
Make
for
your
doing
notes. Moving on. Deposit of funds, 2.5. So,
It's the code. It's the 45 days for the code.
oh, so we're not compliant to the code. We need to
that. Make
fix
it
that.
public.
Historically, Madam Chair, we've been more concerned about the calendar that county finance has required us to follow for our budget presentations. I think at the end of the day, if the county finance director says, here's the date, if we meet that date, I don't think anyone's going, is gonna fuss. The date in the code is there to protect county finance. So as long as if it was the pleasure of the board, we could leave it as is, and I'm fine with that, or we could say, or such other date as established by the county finance director.
I'd leave it as is because it's the code. Okay, back to deposit of funds, 2.5. Ms. Black?
Okay. So this is like official collection of money by the school system and the school, not necessarily like PTAs, PTOs, parent support.
I defer all money questions to Mary Ellen. I will answer the problem.
Good evening. Yes, I do believe it is in those internal school funds that we control versus, I think the SSOs, the school support organizations have their own rules, but this is for the internal school funds. So the schools that they get from fees or for field trips and that type of stuff.
Okay, so payment for those fees has to be made through our official
Yes,
portal.
yes.
Okay, thanks.
And those are just basic accounting, accountability principles while we're not allowing Venmo, Cash App.
Yes.
Right. Those are those safeguards that we
Yes.
learn in accounting.
Yes.
Any other questions?
So sports boosters, band boosters, all that's an aside.
Those are probably their own nonprofits.
They'll have their own accounts and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Okay, moving on, inventories 2.702. There was a question, line 15, there seems to be a typo. What is that number supposed to be?
I'm sure it's 10,000, thank you. We'll get that, you'll see the correct one.
So we were, I think we were trying to make it 10,000. We had heard the state was making it 10,000, but they were planning to, but they didn't. So we need to actually put it back to 5,000 until the state Department of Education approves that.
So we'll just remove this policy from second read if you guys are.
Okay.
But we will bring it back if they pass it to kind of, again, for efficient, effective operations.
Moving on to audits, 2.703. There was the first lines 4 and 5 amended.
Is this our annual audit, Mary Ellen?
Any questions? No. Go ahead, Ms. Mary Ellen.
Just stay up there.
Yeah, this is just our annual audit, and they're just trying to get a little clearer language, so it's not a material change, just language clarification.
To include what, like the boosters and any, is that accounted for in an annual audit? Like, no?
No.
No.
Yeah, they have to do their own, but we have a school funds audit, and then we have the audit that's with the county finance.
So if someone steals from the PTO, that's not on us. You see those cases all the time.
More than I care to.
We have no liability, okay? Moving on. Payroll procedures, 2.802. Mary Ellen, you got a lot of these.
Yeah, it's a time of year. And again, I think some of this was just kind of tidying up some languages for clarity.
Mhm. Any questions on that from the board? Having heard none, moving on. Salary deductions, 2.803.
I have a question. Who would take a voluntary salary reduction, or give me an example of somebody?
So that could be a deduction that they want to send to the credit union. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just something,
My mind was
Yep.
reduction, I guess.
yeah.
All right, thank you. Still a little bit of the anesthesia.
Smoking too much weed,
Public meeting, Joe. I'm gonna strike that last comment. Purchasing, 2.805. This one I had questions.
Same.
Lines 26, 27, 28, 29, we took out the amount. Why did we take out a cap for emergency?
I think we just wanted that if it's an emergency purchase, it just needed to go through this process. So rather than having an amount, it's just whether it's, so it could be a small, but an amount that needs to, and I don't know, Scott, if there was something I'm trying to remember if there was a code change for that reason, if you had
It's
talked about.
actually more transparency, Madam Chair. So previously, there was authority for the executive committee to do something, you know, and some back and forth. And what we have here is emergency purchases shall be submitted to the executive committee, and then later there's a report to the entire board for ratification. So it recognizes that the executive committee has the authority to act in the event of an emergency, but if it's bypassing the regular process, the board still has to approve it.
We had an
A very
example of that
recent-
just recently, yeah. We did that just
Yes,
Go
sir.
ahead. Go ahead,
It
Tom.
is the central BPOD HVAC systems. It was like right at $480-something thousand. Of course, sent something to you guys prior to the executive committee approving it, but then the next board meeting, you saw it for approval on that board meeting. So it's actually putting that process in place for anything regardless of the amount of money.
So I had a question, just kind of going back to our last board meeting and the Help Me app. Was that, Mary Ellen, a line item, or was that an emergency purchase?
That was through our regular purchasing protocols.
Okay.
Is there a set limit on the regular purchasing protocols?
Look at
Yeah.
2.806. It's on the next policy.
Bids and quotations? That
I have
takes
a
us into
question
that?
on
Well, and also,
2.805.
Madam Chair, if you look at the top of 2805, under routine purchases shall include expenditures for supplies, salaries, and routine expenditures required for operation, et cetera, approved and provided for in the budget. So generally speaking, if this board is going to authorize a particular department to buy widgets, you know, maybe some blue widgets, maybe some red widgets, the line item authorizes the administration here to go ahead and make those routine purchases. Those routine purchases are done pursuant to 2806. So the authority to spend is under 2805. The manner whereby purchasing goes out and gets the bids and quotes is 2806.
Larry?
On line 2223, there is, who is the director of procurement?
Lindsay Sapero.
And she has this documentation for all emergency purchases?
Yes.
Is this by year or by month?
I think just for each transaction, she would have a file for the purchase, and then it would submit it for the next board meeting.
Well, I understand there's a file for each transaction, but this documentation would include all that information, or? I'm just trying to understand what document we would be referring to.
So if there was an emergency purchase, so there was something, and like the director of maintenance needed to go out and buy something to, stop, flooding from happening, get the thing done, and then we'd come back and create a report that would show, here's the purchase that we made, and document what happened. That would get executive committee approval and then come to the next board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're getting two things mixed up here, right? We're getting a routine purchase that is within the guidelines of purchasing, the rules for it and also the procedures for it, where an emergency purchase order is something that would exceed those limits, that would require us to either put it out for a bid or get 3 bids on it. The emergency allows us to go around that, have the executive committee approve it, and then bring it to the board for final approval.
And those limits are set by the budget.
Yeah, well, and if there's a true emergency where you have something that's not in the budget. So an emergency could be something that's not budgeted for at all, and
That's why it's an
anymore,
emergency.
we've become sophisticated enough, I don't know what that would be. Or the limit, the amount exceeds the limit that's in the budget. So an emergency is, we have to have school tomorrow, and so the administration has to take some kind of action.
Any follow-up questions?
I have a question concerning Help Me. We have a contract for that, but it hasn't been signed, and we haven't approved it. How are we implementing that without a signed contract?
We do have a contract, and it has gone through the procurement process. We did not implement it based on the fact that we got the stop here. So right now, we do have a signed contract, and there's a conversation happening right now. I said I'd bring it back here for input. Do we move forward? We've asked them to delay that contract to the fall of '25 if we move forward, and I will bring that conversation to the board.
Could I get the information on that contract, please?
Yeah, I think you've talked to Lindsay, but yes, we'll get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
So the director of procurement can sign contracts? Help me understand
Yeah.
that.
So
Yes.
again, you go to,
The easy answer is under 492203, the General Assembly has authorized school systems that have a dedicated purchasing department to act as the purchasing agent for the board. So this board has created a purchasing department, and so under your board policies, you have delegated your responsibilities to these folks to make routine purchases.
Under this policy?
Well, under several policies, but this is one of them. 2805 is one of them. The big piece is if you start with 492203 C, it says any board that has a dedicated purchasing department is authorized, and then there's an entire process that's set forth, and that's basically the four corners under which Ms. Shapiro lives. And she has an entire purchasing administrative procedure manual that periodically I review with them to be sure that it's compliant with expectations from the comptroller's office or other dictates from the state, and also your board policy. And periodically we update your board policy to allow for efficient operation of schools.
I just think that's a good explanation for this board.
The alternative would be this board would have to be the purchasing agent to buy milk for your schools, toilet paper, the staples on any number of tree killing devices the administration hands out monthly. You see my point.
Yes, we like to stay under operations.
Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay, Ben.
Use another example. Let's say the IT department comes to us and they say, hey, we really need to invest in some technology for whatever reason. We think this contract with this service provider is gonna be $100,000 annually. You're telling me that purchase of $100,000 can be made without no board approval?
say it again now. Are you talking about a professional service, or are you talking about a?
Any software, and I'm just using that example because I'm trying to take it easy on Science
Yeah.
with the Help Me app and not use an example, but any software purchase, any purchase that a
Not of
department
$100,000, no.
So what is that number? Is it
Well, it would
50,000?
it would follow,
It's
it could go out for a bid, right? So just
Yeah.
depending on the dollar amount, we have certain protocols where you get 3 quotes, that satisfies the procurement. So there has to be a procurement action. And so it could be, but if there's budgetary approval for it and it meets all procurement, we use a consortium, it might not necessarily come to the board for $100,000.
But if it's budgetary approval, that would be from the budget that was made the prior year, right? So it would be a new year. Does that make sense? Like, any new purchase made this year would not be in the budget.
If
because
it wasn't
it's-
budgeted, but if they had budget to buy equipment, then therefore that budget would allow
Ben,
that.
look at your policy, the next one, 2.806. And it has the
No, I get that,
50,000.
and that's stating that there's gonna be a competitive bid process. That bid process clearly can happen in the background without the board's understanding, and then,
Generally, you're right.
correct.
What you're saying is like next year's budget, so to stay on technology, the IT this year is submitting a budget, and they might say, we need X dollars for whatever, new computers, for new software, for whatever. That is actually a line item in their budget that we go through approval, that you guys go through approval. So once they have that line item for that dollar amount, they're allowed to spend that dollar amount purchasing said thing that they identified, but it has to go through our processes to ensure that it meets all of our expectations and it's within the parameters of their budget.
So in that scenario, that was a conversation that was had prior, that was built into the budget for next year, that's worked into it. What I'm saying is, current year in flight, right now, for whatever reason, a particular department says, hey, we need to make this purchase for this piece of program or software or whatever it is, that's not in the budget that was already voted on and approved, those purchases can be made.
Well, wait, did you say not? If
It
it's
said
not in the
emergency
budget.
If it's not in the budget, correct.
If it's not in the budget, then the purchasing department doesn't have the authority to do the spend. So it would either be, have to be an emergency, or they would have to bring it to the board and ask for approval.
Not
Generally-
necessarily. If they had money sitting there they hadn't used on
That was-
something else,
Correct.
then they could do
Right,
it.
but if they saw, like, so you see a lot with maintenance types of things, where we're like, oh, we needed to get a new chiller, and we were like, oh, we don't have that budgeted, we would bring a budget amendment, usually taking
Right.
it from fund balance, and when you approve that, then that gives them the line item authority to do that. Now, just because they have the money there, they still have to follow a procurement process. So if they want to buy something for $300,000, there's a process for that. If we're not under a consortium, it has to come for approval through the contract. So you see in the packet, the bids and quotations, so those come in the packet. So that's when you're approving those. But if it's under $50,000, there's certain protocols. If it's under a consortium, there's certain protocols. So it might be helpful, when we last revised these, we also brought the purchasing manual. So it might be helpful for you to have that, because it gives a lot of kind of day-to-day stuff and might give some more visibility around the process. And we can certainly have Ms. Sapero come, because she and Scott are really good friends.
Lindsay is excellent at this. I want to be sure that I understood your question, because Ms. Schaefer corrected me, maybe I didn't understand your question. So, where the board approves a budget, you have authorized the administration to spend based upon the specified line items. So, if within a line item, if they're planning to spend on blue widgets and they decide, you know what, we really want a different kind of widget, but it fits that line item, they can make that administrative change because it's more efficient to do that. But if they don't want widgets, if instead what they want is plush toys, and it's in the same budget category but different line items, they can't spend out of that line item without first doing a budget amendment.
I'm with you. There can be no impact on the budget. I'm with you on that.
Not only can there be no impact on the budget, but they can't spend outside of a line item without board authority. So within a line item they can, but if they take it out of a line item, then they have to get a budget amendment. So
And so like, and when we brought the true up, that's what our true up does, 'cause it goes and looks all the administratively, we might move $5 from here to here during the year just to accommodate budgets, but it's still within the total appropriation. But if we are going to bring an additional thing that was not budgeted, then that would be when we would bring those budgets. And grants, you'll see that a lot more, because a lot of times there's just whole new items that they're budgeting.
right.
Okay.
This is probably something that would be easier to explain with something specific. And of course, I'm glad to talk with any board member at any point in time about this, and we can set up a time to meet with Lindsay and walk through a specific. But it's kind of hard to do it in the abstract right here unless I can show it to you.
It may be a good thing at a budget meeting to have Lindsay come and maybe talk a little bit about the procurement process.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not trying to get into paper clips, Scott.
No.
I'm talking about big line item expenditures that could impact the budget. So appreciate clarification.
Generally speaking, when the board approves a budget, you're giving the administration lots of authority within those items. They have lots of discretion within those items. But they don't have the discretion to spend in excess or to move without coming back to the board. Yep.
Felice.
Okay, two-part question. First of all, how much was that contract for the Help Me app? And was that considered an emergency purchase? I might not be understanding.
Sorry. So it's $22,000 and no, but it fits within the line.
Okay, what line item?
I think it was under software.
Under software? Okay.
Jill.
I think I'll answer my question. Like, if we approve a budget that has like security software as a line item, then IT goes back and goes through the procurement process and gets bids for different security software, and they get to typically the power resides with them to choose which security software that they purchase based on what we've said is okay to spend on security software. That's kind of how that goes. Like, once we have approved the line item, for most things, it takes it. But for things like curriculum, we are involved in that process. But for things like software or other purchases, the authority is to choose like which security software would be with the IT department.
I think it depending on the dollar amount.
Which would explain why it didn't come back to us for this specific thing, because we already approved a budget that said this line item is software.
Yeah,
Okay.
so, because it was under $50,000, so that's really where but there could be purchases that we're making that are over $50,000 because you approve, say, consortium agreement. So those, you approve the agreement, and so we can, lease a copier, we can do different things because of the agreement that you approve, or you approve a contract with Staples, and so you can go buy, certain equipment with them, because we have a contract.
So I want to, I feel like there's this big elephant in the room that if we just talked about it, it'd be easier. That the Help Me app, I know y'all are looking, the issue with the Help Me app is not anything about board policy or purchasing requirements, anything like that. It was a rollout issue, right? We did a poor job of rolling it out, and that's why we are pulling it back. There wasn't anything from anyone that didn't follow a procedure, didn't follow a policy. It was rolled out poorly, and that's why we're stepping back from it.
I just want to understand the process though, really, so
I
I
know.
wasn't really that worried about, we've
feel like
already
there's
settled
like
that part, but I wasn't thinking
Yeah.
about that. I was
Yeah.
really trying to understand these policies.
Well, I feel like there's like, we're trying to jump around this. I'm just like, we rolled it out bad.
Any further comments?
Real.
Can everybody clear their lights for me? Thank you. Okay, so we moved on from, I don't know, that's two of them. We kind of talked about it once. 2.805, then we talked about 2.806.
209.
Now we're moving on to 2.9.
Yeah.
Okay. Student activity funds management. Any comments on 2.9? Some changes on 18 and 19. Hearing nothing, we're moving on. 4.212, charter school application process. And before we answer this is a hot topic. I don't know if anybody else was contacted. I think Chairman Smith was. So this policy is only about our approval.
Of the school.
That's the only thing we have. There's nothing in this policy about oversight, correct?
That is correct. It's just taken mainly just directly from the applicable statutes or state board rules mainly, and it's just about approval in that process. What an application is, what's required of an application, the timeline. It is not about oversight. It's just about here's how you apply, and here's that process.
Does the TCA state that we're supposed to have oversight of charter schools?
No,
Who does?
they have a board. Each charter school has their own governing board, right?
Yeah. When you
And-
say oversight, I assume you're talking about day-to-day operations.
Hiring. Yeah,
Oh, that-
operations.
That's a great question. That is delegated exclusively to their managing authority. I forget what it's called in the statute, but their governing board is exclusively responsible for their day-to-day operations. And so if they delegate that to a human resource officer, that's their job, not ours.
I just want to make it abundantly clear.
So,
It's not on us.
Yeah, just, it was helpful to me what you told me today in 2 sentences about what our job is with regard to the charter, once it's, so say what you said to me today. You don't even remember, do you? It gets worse.
I think that I do. I just am trying to be careful because there's a lot going on around this, and then I'm looking at you as if you can read my mind. I don't want to say anything.
Because you said in 2 sentences.
Well, I'll
clarify
say
what
this,
our
when-
role is, once that charter schools operate,
Yeah.
our job, our role, what do we do?
Yeah, we're a pass-through for money. Obviously, funds come to us, and, Mary Ellen can tell you exactly how much we're pushing out. Now, we do have oversight to make sure they're following state law, right? And we're doing that. I think that it's, there are some things within this that we have concerns about, as probably you do. And we're continuing to work with that charter school to make sure that processes are in place to follow the right procedures.
But we did exactly what we were supposed to do
Yes,
as it pertains to this specific episode.
yes.
We did exactly what we were supposed to do.
Abundantly clear. Okay, moving on. Well, I guess I didn't ask. Anybody have questions about those revisions? Hearing none, moving on. 5.102, classification and qualifications. The changes were on line 23 and 24, very minimal. Comments? Hearing none, moving on. Here we go, the big daddy, 6.311. So before we start any more arguments, I want to make a more neutral suggestion, because the board before us worked really hard on this policy, and I know that we also have this current board has some further concerns. So if I'm looking at it, and I look at not having maybe so many red lines to make it more palatable, I would say lines 4 and 5, we don't X out, we leave it there. But the new addition that they've added, starting with accordingly, subject to the exception set forth in this policy, students may not use or possess cell phones or personal communication devices. I would add, on their person while on campus during the regular school day. Okay? And then I would leave lines 7 through 25 the way that they were. Lines 26 and 27, the only suggestion, because if we add on their person, is I would take out line 27, closed pockets. So if it can't be on their person, it can't be in their pocket. Okay, leave the rest. And then line 30 and 31, I would suggest deleting for grades 9 through 12, each individual school may choose to allow cell phones in designated areas during lunch. So that would go to what some of the board members have suggested, that at no time during the school day can they have it on their person, but they can still have it in their lockers for after-school activities, transportation, in the case of an emergency. And if they don't have a locker, we've got some places in here they can store it. So that is my suggestion, and we'll open it up for discussion, but I'm trying to eliminate maybe so many red lines, but still addressing some concerns. Okay, first we got Larry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The policy is pretty sound originally. I don't mind some of the changes you're suggesting, but this refers back directly to policy 6.300, which is Code of Behavior and Discipline. Now, every school is supposed to have a copy of their COAB posted on their school website. Almost all the schools take this current policy and enforce it. The problem isn't the policy, the problem is enforcement. So what do we do? Again, it's also about exceptions.
I apologize, we don't have 6.300 here, but we could definitely look at it.
Well, what is, you have to look at what is our district COAB and what is each individual school's COAB, because sometimes they're different. And one thing is, and I'm only going on the research I have found, but having the cell phones in your possession is enough to cause distraction.
Well, that's why I'm saying, suggesting not on the person, so it's not in their physical possession during the school day. Yes, it would be stored somewhere, according to the policy that was drafted before, is my suggestion.
And then therein lies a problem. What do we do for schools that have lockers but don't utilize them because of the cost of repairing them? What do we do for schools that have more students than they have lockers? And so these exceptions need to be addressed, and how are we going to handle that, or how is it going to be handled? Is it going to be handled through the IT line item? Are we going to purchase?
Ms. Felice says she has a good idea for that.
Okay,
Felice, share your
sure,
idea.
go ahead.
Okay, having been a teacher when students were using cell phones all the time, and it was very difficult to enforce no matter what the rules were. I'm in favor of the cell phone ban, so I'm just letting you know my opinion. But as far as a solution that I was looking at, and I believe Chattanooga Christian does this, is have them leave, and it might be a little of an expense depending on implementation, but having students leave their phones with their first block teacher, and there's the expense of putting them in a sleeve. So every classroom, they'd go to class and they'd leave it in a sleeve for the day and get it out at the end of the day. That's how they know for sure that students do not have their phones with them, because it's almost impossible if it's, supposedly in their locker, unless you collect them. Unless you collect them, it's almost impossible to keep them from using them during the day. But I just think, and teachers who have done it successfully at schools, a lot of them, when you come to their class, the ones who've done it well, and they'd have pockets for them to keep their phone in during that class as well, and that always worked for them. So that's my suggestion.
Okay.
Well, then in response to that, then that's going to require all these students to go back to their first period class before they exit the school.
Or their locker, and we don't have lockers for every student. But yes.
Gary?
Yeah, this is just a request I'm making. You suggested a lot of changes to what they've already done here. So I need to see those, whatever the final read is going to be, I need to see that to be able to read through it.
I didn't want to do it because it's such a hot topic until I discussed it, is where I was at with it. But I understand your request, for sure.
Whatever you all discuss here, we will make sure that it's reflected on the board agenda, so you have that look before you can vote.
Madam Chair, if I could make an observation. The Tennessee House has enacted their half of legislation that may actually preach or omit whatever this board decides to do.
Right.
It might be worth waiting to see. But there's some dissent. My thought would be that the board could rationally wait until after this legislative session to see what the General Assembly says we have to do. Now, on the other hand, if the pleasure of the board is to do a full ban, we can do that without the General Assembly's advice. So
Maybe we should see what they have, what bill they have.
I could see this board spending a fair amount of time again, only because I sat over here and watched.
It's not any different than what we've been doing now, Scott. What are you talking about, dude? It's not any different than what we've been doing. It's what that bill proposed. It's not any different.
Well, it does say a total ban. Well, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, all right.
The question is going to be, what does the Senate do with it? And I don't have a read on what the Senate will do with it. I simply don't know.
They're gonna rubber stamp.
Who time is it?
Okay. Felicia, you're
Well,
off.
it's,
Jackie.
Okay. Okay, I don't think we need to make any changes. I like it, what it says now. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I already read this marked out. I read through it. I'm okay with it being marked out. I don't really think they need to have them at all. I do think somehow, those students that participate in extracurricular activity, after school may need to get in touch with somebody, because generally the office may be closed. But to figure out a way for that. But even though I do appreciate what the previous board did, I just am really not trying to redo all of this or take some out, put some in. It just needs to, in my opinion, I like it. It's just basic plain. It says, you know, not doing campers during the regular school day. So that means, you know, 7 to 3 or whatever time the school starts. So I like it like this, instead of us trying to go through and keep going back and forth with all this. I'm not gonna be as gracious as the previous board and take all that kind of time, because either we are going to be for it or we're going to be banned it all together. So I just think we need to move on with what the recommendations of changes are going to be. I mean, the reality is I think every school is probably going to go to no phones, because the teachers complain about it being such a big distraction. I know parents want their kids to have cell phones, but, you know, they just need to, if they bring them, I think they should be taken up, because that's the problem now. You got all these rules, but nobody's really enforcing it, because teachers shouldn't have to deal with the headache of fussing with a child about a phone. It shouldn't even be occurring. The incident shouldn't be happening when they're getting into it with a child or with a parent about a $200 phone or a $1,000 phone, whatever it may be. It just shouldn't be happening. That's just my opinion.
Jill.
And this is probably getting into the weeds a little bit. I just have some concerns around collecting phones and then the time it will take to collect phones and give them back out. So if they have to go back to their first period class and get that, are we asking our teachers to stay past their normal hours or to pass phones back out? If it's at the office, are we taking away from instructional time so that the student can collect their phone before they get on a bus and they don't, or are they gonna miss their bus? And, cause I mean, these are all things that I think about as far as like end of the day, how are we getting those phones back to the kids? I feel like it's easier to collect them than it is to return them, and it's more time consuming to return them. And are we taking away instructional time or interfering with teachers' time or putting the smooth transition with transportation? Are we causing havoc in those areas by trying to implement a collection and return situation?
Ben.
Thank you, Jody. Jill, you raised a great question. Jackie, you as well. I think the heart of it, I mean, we're all circling around the same concept that the previous policy in theory made sense, but ultimately when it comes to the actual implementation, that's where there's been a challenge. And the challenge is rooted in the fact that these kids still have their phones. The reality is these kids are going to be, it's like a moth to a flame. I mean, there's no way you can minimize their interest on it throughout the day if it's in their possession. So ultimately the question is, and what Larry's talking about as well, is how do we manage these phones during the day, right? What do we do with them? How do we enforce it so that the burden of responsibility is not put on the teachers, because that's unfair. But all the teachers are complaining that the phones are in the classroom, so they want something done about it. But how do you do that in the right way? And I think that's what I'm not seeing here, and that's probably what we need to figure out. I know Joe Smith has discussed the honor pouches. That's been discussed. CCS does use it today. They've had great success with it, but ultimately that's a cost, right? It's a cost. I mean, if you were to look at 13,000, Shannon, keep me honest, 13,650 high school age students in Hamilton County. If you were to outfit each child with a yonder pouch, and to be clear, yonder pouch, the child has it in his possession, his or her possession. They just cannot access that phone until a predetermined time. So a teacher, administrator, or a central point within the building, an exit, for example, would have the magnetic mechanism that could release the pouch. The child still has the phone, but they can't utilize it. They can't check TikTok. They can't check Instagram. To do that is about $500,000 to implement.
That's
before,
just high school.
That's all high school, every single high school in Hamilton County. Now that's before negotiation. And I'm not saying that's what we have to do, but what I'm trying to find is a balance here for the individuals that feel like the child has to have the phone versus what ultimately we should be looking at, the teachers and the students, and then having the phone and harming their day-to-day.
Larry,
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
And this still doesn't address the issue. Let me ask you a question, Dr. Robertson, or Sonia. What is the number, what do we have on our Chromebooks that would be as good a calculator that you might need in upper level math or physics or chemistry to be able to do the kind of work that might be necessary in some of these AP classes and honors classes?
On the Chromebook or?
Do we have?
There's some calculators on Chromebooks. Kids also have, graphing calculators, very robust calculators that
Okay,
they're
so
using.
the reasoning that they need their phones for accessing an advanced calculator is just a straw man. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, I don't know that I've
heard
ever.
that excuse. I've never heard that reason.
The excuses that we talked about last time in the 425-minute conversation that the previous board had was about like video editing classes or the AV classes or in a class where you're doing a science project that you're taking pictures of cycles of something. Those were the examples that we got last time.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, I think that, your statement earlier and Ms. Haddon's statement earlier is like the hard part. Like the policy, yes, may change. We've got an implementation issue. We have a people issue right now. It's not, I don't think it's the policy is the problem. I think it's being implemented. There's too much variation across the district of how it's being implemented.
Yes, and teachers across the district are frustrated because they've been having to develop their own rules in their own classes, and that burden shouldn't be on our teachers.
But it's going to be, and Ms. Haddon said it. She said it right, as a kid said it to me last week after watching, the meeting, that, teachers don't want the headache of having to argue with the kid over a cell phone.
Not if it's in pouch, though.
They'd rather be suspended, a lot of them, than give up their phone.
Yeah, but let's be honest, we have some schools, Howard High School, largest high school in the city, does this really, really well. And what they do is they have a collection at every class. It's a basket. It's
in every
class. It's what they hang it in there. But the reason it works well is because their administration was really clear on the purpose and the why, right? They trained the teacher. They were clear about the consequences when the kids didn't do it. And everyone, all the faculty were like, we're on board. And they pushed with the kids for the first 5 days, and then kids pushed back, and the teachers won. And now the kids just walk in and put it in the basket. But there's a lot of things that happen to make that happen. Strong leadership, strong vision, clear communication, kids bought in, the entire faculty bought in. So it's completely possible, but it is complicated in every way, and that's the piece. And so mandating compliance is really, really hard. We elevate this as the expectation. We do expect every single school to do it, so on and so forth. But how it gets, where the accountability is and how successful it is, in my opinion, doesn't have anything to do with exactly what is in this policy, and it's the adult's ability to create the conditions that make it possible.
It's like Saudi Daisy purchased the sleeves that are inside right inside the front door for every class. It can hold 36 phones.
That's right.
And
The
they
kids
did
put it in
this
their number and they take
at
it out of
least
their number. That's right.
2 years or so before we even talked about this policy in 2023.
But I would say that the ingredients at Saudi are the exact same ingredients as Howard, right?
Yeah.
It was clear, it was well communicated, there was a mechanism. The schools bought those pouches, you know, that was something they did. They decided pouches, baskets, whatever they wanted to do, and they implemented that.
Well, I think the majority of our high schools are following this policy. And, you know, and it says, you know, shall not be seen or heard. And in some cases, they're extreme, like East Hamilton High School. And there are others that do exactly the same thing. I mean, they go in the locker, you turn them off, put them in the lockers, that's it. You get it at lunch. And even that, if it's going to be abused, could be taken away. So,
We do know phones are being confiscated because we hear it from
yes,
parents
I know.
all the time.
I know.
You know.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Jackie, you're right. It needs to be simple and just common sense should prevail. If I want to drive my car to school every day, I gotta pay for I gotta pay for that parking space out there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay? If I want to be a cheerleader, I gotta go buy my uniform to have the privilege to be a cheerleader, right? If I want to have my phone on my possession at school, I ought to have to pay for that pouch. I can afford the $1,000 phone, right, Jackie?
There you go.
So I'll have to pay for that. I think they're $27, I believe is what it said, is what it costs. I'll have to buy that pouch.
Make you pay it back.
If I want to carry my phone around, I can afford a $2,000 phone. So why can't I afford a $27 pouch? To me, this is just so common sense. We want to talk about data. All the data everywhere tells us to get rid of these dadgum phones. And then we all got so upset here a few weeks ago when our legislators voted for the voucher fund. When all their constituents were saying, don't vote for that, don't vote for that. And now, everybody's saying, Board, make these phones go away. And we're not going to listen to them? My goodness. I want those phones put up. And I want a pouch. And I want the person that's going to carry his phone to buy that pouch.
Okay, then that needs to be going in the policy.
Yeah, well, yeah.
At the student's expense. So we'd have to revise the policy, Shannon, to at least add that.
So I think if we're going that direction, we should consider students that are on free and reduced lunch, students that are living in poverty. What do we do there?
Them be the ones either.
We help out where we can.
Okay, I got to get back in order, guys. Felice is next.
Okay, and I agree completely.
Yeah, you
I
are.
think the issue right now is implementation. And I really like what you said about what's going on at Howard, and it's really similar to what I said was successful for the teachers I worked with, who were able to keep their cell phones in pouches. The teachers who had them in pouches, it worked in their classrooms. And what we have not done is maybe just start out with something simple and provide every classroom with maybe not a technical pouch that's going to cost, the one I was talking about was going to be $300,000, but maybe just simple pockets with their name on it, just something really simple and not technological, but in every room. So if they go, not just leave it with their first block class, but leave it in, and I say a pouch with their name so they can see, who's taking what. Leave that in every classroom that they go to. The only thing they would have it in between classes, but
Which would be on their person.
yeah, that's the only thing. But if that works, so that they're not using their phone during class, anyway. But it is all about the implementation and not whether they should have them or not.
I feel like the simple language of on their person, guys, kind of solves a lot of these concerns.
But how do
But
you,
I-
how do you
how
know
do-
if it's on their person or not? If
Right,
it's,
because
you
they
know.
do that all the time. And how do we also not make it such a headache for teachers? I mean, sure, some schools may be able to manage it well, and that's great, but the majority of them are not. And I know technology, everything is changing, but reality is, why do children have to have their phones in the school to utilize?
No, I don't think anyone's saying to use during the school.
Well, they
I-
do though. That's the reality. They are using it during the school. That's what I'm saying. Not necessarily for school. They're using it for whatever reason. That they
I feel like
shouldn't.
we have a consensus without voting about use during the school day. And we have a consensus without voting that it shouldn't be on their person. We need to turn our focus to the implementation, whether we want to require a pouch purchased by the student, or we want to make an expenditure on behalf of the students. I think that's where we're at. I think we have pretty much a board consensus that we don't want them there on their person, but how do we implement it? Steve is next.
Thank you, Jody. I have a text from a Soddy-Daisy High School student. Phone pockets in each class where each student has been assigned a number has worked the best. It's straightforward and efficient.
Phone pockets.
Can I explain it?
Yeah.
As someone who sometimes spends times on Pinterest, they're talking about shoe organizers, y'all. They're talking about hanging shoe organizers. We're not saying the words, but that's what they're manufactured as. They literally hang like a clear shoe organizer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. Each kid's given a number, and they use that number in every classroom they go to. And so if I'm number 2, my phone goes in number 2 at every class I'm in. And so, or whatever the situation is. Or they have a number for each class or whatever. Or you just leave them alone and make them turn the backs of their phones forward and they can recognize their own phone. But that's what we're talking about. My concern was around, do we still have schools that are not allowing any sort of bags or backpacks?
Howard.
And
They
that's
allow-
why
they allow purses,
and
but-
that's why they've chosen to collect the phones in each classroom, is because they don't, number one, they don't have enough lockers for every student, and those students aren't allowed backpacks. So there's literally nowhere to carry them except for in their pockets between classes. There's no car to store them in, there's no locker, there's no whatever. There's nowhere else except for their pockets, and that goes against the person thing. So if we wanted to amend the policy to say, if a student chooses to bring a phone to school, the phones have to be collected at the beginning of every class period and returned at the end of every class period.
Here's my concern, is that doesn't cover lunch, and that's some of the others' concerns. I know that's my administrator's concern, is they don't want them to have it during lunch. So where do they put it during lunch?
And that's what I'm saying is, like, I don't think we can include on their person, because in a lot of instances there's nowhere else for them to be except for in their pockets. We can still make the policy say that they can't use it during lunch or that they can't use it during school hours, but we can't say that it can't be on their person because there's literally nowhere else to put it in some schools.
That's if we choose that.
Ben,
Hey, Jody. All of us except for Joe Smith are too old to know what it's like going through school
Be careful.
with cell phones.
I'm older.
The data I've seen, 9 out of 10 schools report issues with cyberbullying. If you've had a child that has been the recipient of that, you know firsthand how hard that is. We all can agree that when these kids are in our buildings, we want their focus to be on the education. We don't want it to be on a group text that's making fun of so-and-so because he didn't have the right shoes. We don't want it to be on a TikTok meme or whatever it is. And the idea of having a cubby or whatever you guys are describing, that doesn't prevent them from using it out the day, whether it's in the hallways, cafeteria, or bathroom break. Cyberbullying is still going to happen. And I think we have an obligation and a duty to protect these kids, first and foremost, and to provide ample opportunity to focus on academics. And the only way to prevent that is if they don't have access to it throughout the day. And we're asking for 8 hours out of a 24-hour day for these kids to have a reprieve from social media and the onslaught of notifications and text threads, and just focus on academics, where for a quarter of their life they can be kids and not have to worry about everything else that's happening out in the world.
I'm going to make an ask for a quote on the magnetized pouch that declines access. It's just a quote.
Middle through high.
It'd have to be middle through high because that's when they start. That's a lot of money. But that's when after-curricular and all that stuff starts.
And maybe get numbers on just kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch and everybody, and show what that difference is.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Justin, I'd like to be included on any quotes that you guys work at.
Do you guys want to quote on the pouches too, or the hanging pouches?
No, the magnetized pouches, not the classroom.
Something similar to Yonder, some product that's the same thing.
Yeah, because
Whatever's,
you have to have a centralized location
That's how they do it.
for
Yeah,
them
that's-
to, like, as soon as you walk in the building,
Yep.
you put it in a Yonder pouch and you take it up to a magnet and locks it. And the only way you can unlock it is to go through the same process at the end of the day.
Teachers can have one. They can do it in real time in the event of emergency. Principals will have one, and
Oh,
there's
I
one
forgot.
at every single
I
exit.
forgot. I forgot. We're gonna take it on
it just may be something that we have to really invest in.
I still say, the equipment to lock and unlock should be our responsibility. The pouch itself,
That comes with it as part of the quote.
I understand that, but the pouch itself, there ought to be investment by the person that wants to have his phone at school.
I'm not arguing that at all.
That's
I
why
got-
we're gonna get the quote for everybody versus those who possibly couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I can live with
I think that's the best solution we've heard coming forward, and we can see where we go from there.
So I'm going to suggest that we leave this policy alone for now and see what the state legislature is going to end up with, as our director of schools has suggested. And I believe that this needs time. I believe I've already sent you a message. It takes time to implement this, and this ought to be rolled out in, July to our teachers, in June to our administrators at each school. This is a process that has to take place, because any legislation that's going to take place probably may not take effect until,
July 1st.
well, it might take effect in late May or early June. But it could be voted on in April or early May and go into effect on like the 28th of May. So I think we're spinning our wheels here right now because it's an implementation issue.
I think we didn't waste time in coming to the conclusion that we want a quote for the pouch. I think that was productive and heading in the right direction. At least I pray so. 1.4, school board meetings.
Oh, I had a question on that.
Jackie, go first. I heard you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to know why, on number 25 and number 36, why it's only 2 times, no board member shall participate electronically in board meetings due to being out of the county for work more than 2 times per school year. I wanted to know why that's only 2 and the other ones are 3. So why can't all of them be 3? That's the question. Is there a reason why it's 2 for those being, since everybody, well, most of us, well, I do, I work, and sometimes so far, I know I've already got 2 conflicts, and it may end up being a third, so and I'll be out of town, so my question is, do I miss the meeting? Because I can't do more than 2 online or virtual, or whatever?
Mary's pulling up the policies if we can look at it, but our language tracks with the General Assembly's code.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't something that we just pulled out of thin air. The General Assembly has set these timelines. As far as the why, that's a policy decision that they've made. I will point out that until the General Assembly started doing this, there was no avenue for you to meet virtually, and then in recent years, they've been more liberal. And so these exceptions for having to be here.
Yeah, this was changed back during COVID. I mean, but before
Yes,
then,
sir.
if you didn't come, you didn't come. You didn't
Right.
get to vote, you couldn't participate.
Yeah, you could listen in remotely, you could chime in remotely, but you couldn't vote.
Okay. So I had asked for this to be on there, and you'll see there's a proposed at the end, guys, that was handed to you, a proposed revision to 1.404. It ties in with this, and it's all about hearing from the public. Mr. Bennett did an excellent job.
That's one of the.
This little
that's one
piece
of the
paper that we
loose ones.
added, the new one, it's a memo from Mr. Bennett. And the reason 1.4 is on this agenda is really, he believes, more a 1.404 revision. And if you look on the back page, he shows in red what he suggests we do. Mr. Bennett, you want to talk to it?
Yes, ma'am. So, y'all will recall that there was occasionally we've had questions where, someone has made a presentation to the board and it's really piqued the board's curiosity. But there's not really a mechanism under our current policy for the board to ask follow-up questions. That was actually by design, because when we first were liberalizing our policy, we had maybe a dozen people who were coming to speak. And so the notion of prolonging those conversations meant that we could be here a couple of hours before we got to business. And so what I tried to do was I tried to hear what the board was saying at the last meeting, while at the same time remembering history and how we don't want to eat into the board's valuable time with the work session. So what I put here is a bit of a compromise, and it reads as follows. I know you can read it, but folks listening at home wouldn't have it. At line 36 of the policy, I would propose individuals speaking to the board shall address their remarks to the chair. That's in there right now, and that keeps someone from singling out a board member or an administrator. Each person speaking shall state his or her name, his or her address, and the subject of his or her presentation. Remarks will be limited to 5 minutes. Footnote, most other governmental entities have 3 minutes. This board's been very liberal, has offered 5. Okay. Here's the edit. Board members may use a speaker's unexpired time plus an additional minute to ask the speaker questions. So let me stop right there. So let's suppose someone is addressing the board. They've got 5 minutes. They get done in 4. Well, they've got an extra minute, and so maybe the chair has a question. You know, Mr. Jones, would you care to elaborate on that? Or you said such and such. What did you mean by? They would have their minute, their unexpired time, plus an additional minute to answer the question, or for someone else to ask a follow-up question. So basically, potentially someone's there for 6 minutes. So it's not open mic night, but it's a fair amount of time to ask a follow-up. My language continues. If 2 board members make the request, any topic raised by the speaker may be added to the end of the work session agenda for further discussion by the board. And so that allows for the possibility that maybe someone has said something that y'all hadn't thought about before. And so recognizing that there's still some things to talk about on your agenda, you go ahead and you put it at the end of the work session. And so the chair in his discretion, skip over some things and say, you know what, let's go back to what Mr. Jones was talking about. That's worthwhile. Let's hear about that before our meeting. So what I tried to do was give the board some flexibility to address topics that might be of interest to you without opening a door that makes you lose control of your work session.
Felice.
My one comment is that I actually think 3 minutes is long enough for them to speak.
Me too. But y'all have 5, but we only give them 3. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think 3 minutes is a decent amount of time because I've given speeches that were 3 minutes and it was long enough.
That's the pleasure of this board, and I remember when we adopted this policy, and this was well before the General Assembly actually required time to address the board. There was some debate about 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and I believe it was Mr. Smith who said if a member of the public wants to come here and speak, then we should listen to them speak. But it's the board's time, and so if the board prefers 3 minutes, that's the discretion of the board. If the board is good with 5, that's the discretion of the board.
3 and allow for 2 minutes of rebuttal.
County government
Yeah.
uses 3.
Pardon?
County government uses 3.
County commission's 3 minutes.
Pleasure of the board.
Yes.
So we could maybe revise and bring this back for a second and final or first and final.
So that would be then limited to 3 minutes and up to 2 minutes of questions?
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Justin?
So the way this reads, administration has to remain quiet.
Administration
Well,
referring to
so
you?
I would say that
You guys?
you have the opportunity, when you're setting the agenda, if you want to do a presentation, during the presentation. I would also say that the board has the opportunity. The way it reads is the board would ask the speaker a question. But there's, again, if the board wants to put something at the end of the work session, to hear from the administration, that's within the board's discretion. Again, it's the board's discretion, you can do what you will, but this is an opportunity for the speaker, for the public to interact with the board and for the board to hear from the public. So to answer your question, strictly speaking, this is not the administration's time on the agenda, it's the public's time.
But the chair could put it on at the end
Yes, ma'am.
to allow for elaboration.
Second thing there is that's not a change, that this is allowable at any point.
I beg your pardon?
Putting something on the agenda with a first
You're right.
and a
I mean,
second is not a change. So like this is not actually creating anything different by saying you could have already added it to the end of the agenda.
Well, I would disagree with that a little bit because what we don't have right now is a mechanism where if some board members are intrigued by what Mr. Jones has to say, there isn't an explicit mechanism that reminds them, you know what, I want to listen more about the staffing issue. Mr. Chairman, can we put that at the end of the work session agenda? Yep, we'll do that. Yes, that's been the authority of the board anyway, but this makes it explicit so that if the board maybe wants to hear from the administration, Ms. Jones was critical of X, Y, and Z. Dr. Robertson, what can you update the board on this?
So are we then allowing the person to come back up at the end of the agenda and participate in that conversation?
That's not listed in here. Now, elsewhere in your policy, the chair does have the discretion to recognize someone in the audience where it would be appropriate in context. That's not in this policy, it's somewhere else in your policy. But that's also true, the chair always has the discretion. I think that's discretion that should be used sparingly.
Joe Smith?
We, we went through this some time ago, and there are a lot of times when we'll have somebody speak to us, and I want to know more about that. So when the meeting's over, then I go run that person down. Tell me some more about that. What scares me a little bit, if you know, you mentioned giving them that extra minute, and I'm okay with that, to have some interaction. But you say maybe we want to add that at the end of the work session if we want some further discussion. It's rare that we even get through a work session. You know, so I don't know if that works. I've always said, since I've been here, that 5 minutes at that mic's a long time. It's a long time. You're right. It's a long 5 minutes in front of a mic's a long time. I've always thought 3 minutes. County government does that. City council does that. I don't know. When I mentioned doing 5, and a few people got upset, and they're here. We gotta let them talk. Yeah, okay, let them talk. I even thought that maybe once a quarter we have a public meeting and nothing but let the public talk to us and we talk to them. So that would be my only pushback on that, Scott, is that we never get through a work session to even add anything on that. We're always saying, well, our time's up, we got to stop, so we can start our regular meeting on time. So I don't know if that works. Maybe it works if we go to 3 and allow 2 for questioning. Maybe that makes more sense. But I always do. I mean, a lot of times people say things that I want to hear more about, but I know we can't do it here. If we did, we're going to be here till next week. So after the meeting, I go talk to them. So.
And I will say to your point, Mr. Smith, and I misremembered, I thought it was you who was advocating for more. I stand corrected. But one of the things that this board has tried to avoid historically is getting into too much of a debate, because if you remember back to COVID, there was nothing that the board could say that made anyone happy. And so the board, when we adopted this, the intent was it wasn't going to be a dialogue. What do you have to say? Thank you for your time. But as we've moved along, I've listened to board members find something interesting. I mean, everybody at some point has said, I'd like to hear more about that. To your point about the work session agenda, if it's added to the end of the work session agenda, you might not get to it. That's a fair point.
That's my point, yeah.
But if it's there as a placeholder, maybe you could. I put that in there because it's one of those things that maybe the board wants to do, but you don't have to. So
I like somebody's, like maybe 3 minutes, 2 minutes. I like that idea.
all right.
Okay.
If I can make an observation, Ms. Schaefer, one of the things that we've got right now, and I mentioned this in the memo, I would encourage y'all to read the memo and ask this question. We now have 2 ways for people to address the board. You can do it 72 hours in advance about anything you want to talk about, or you can sign up at the meeting 30 minutes before the meeting about something that's on the agenda. I don't know how rigorously that last piece is enforced. I mean, it may be that the people are signing up are only signing up about agenda items. Sometimes we catch it. It seems to me a lot of times we don't. I commend to you to think about whether we need to have 2 pathways to sign up. It seems a little duplicative to me, but that's not something we have to address tonight.
Okay. For time's sake, I'd like to move on. We can get a draft of this, Shannon? Okay, for a first read?
One thing, Jody.
Okay.
The county commission is 3 minutes, and if you have a group, they limit it to 10. So we had one meeting here where we had 7 people talk on the same subject for 5 minutes,
Yeah, we did.
which I thought, and they said the same thing over and over and over. So my suggestion would be give a group 6 minutes. That's 2 people that are going to say the same thing, right?
And that's a great point, and it's actually in our policy. It's functionally unenforceable, in my opinion, because maybe I show up and I want to talk about textbook selection, and then Dr. Robertson's here and he wants to talk about textbook selection. Well, wait a minute, you 2 are in a group. I've never seen them before in my life.
That Scott, County Commission does it every single week. they sit there and they say, you want to talk about the positive side of this textbook? There's 10 minutes this group. It doesn't matter if Steve takes 6 minutes of it and I take 4 minutes, nobody else gets
Then
to
you're
speak.
done.
They enforce it.
They enforce it.
There it is.
My question is whether we're gonna wanna enforce it. Do we
There's
wanna?
a lot in this policy we're not enforcing.
Well,
My vote would be yes.
to me, it feels like it's the board's policy, it's entirely up to you. I have just watched people want to talk about the same things, and yes, they're the eye rolls. But some people may say, I'm not part of that group, same topic, different group. I think it puts the board in a position where you have to basically decide, I don't believe you. I saw you come in together and you're gonna leave together, I think you're part of the same group, or you're wearing matching t-shirts.
It's the same topic,
Same topic.
not necessarily the group you're with that person, but you're talking about the same
We
topic.
could do it, I mean, we can, it just, it feels a little more aggressive than I think this board has wanted to be. This is a new board, though. I mean, the majority of you were not seated when we adopted the comments to the board policy. If you want to say, you can speak on, one person gets to speak on this topic, and if you're the first to sign up, good for you. Now we'll take a contrary viewpoint. All right, we're done hearing about that topic. We could do that, but that's just a little bit more
Regulated.
regulatory than we have been willing to be.
Okay, we're gonna move on, guys.
Well,
To,
excuse me, I would think that if Mr. Jones was gonna come before us and had before him a document that ended up being, like 5-minute, speech on what XYZ topic, that they should supply the board with a copy and still limit their comments to 3 minutes, period. So they're gonna make the time to come here, they should make the time to make us copies. And some people do that.
We do ask for that in the policy.
Yeah.
okay. We'll work on those. Board goals, 1.7. It's our most important policy. Shannon, is this the draft?
This is the old version.
This is the old version.
It is. We messed that up. I've been on meetings all day and I did not communicate that well. Do you want to go on to another one and I can see if I can print the new version?
Well, based on time, we might just need to add it. Should we add it to the board agenda, the work session? Just based on time tonight. I mean, I've already had everybody here almost 2.5 hours. I want to say that the last, oh boy, we have another memo from Mr. Bennett on a proposed revision regarding flags. We're not going to discuss it. You're going to review it. And then we can bring it back next policy meeting. So we're running out of time, okay? And then
3.2.
yes, 3.210, naming new facilities. This was brought up at one of our board meetings. Mr. Slater.
Okay, had a big issue with Soddy Elementary renaming their mascot. I think not only naming new facilities, but any facility, a field, a mascot, a school color, the hallways, I think all that, if somebody wants to change any of that, I think it needs to come before the board.
So you're talking about lines 21 through 25, Shannon? He's requesting a change for it to go before the board.
Say, instead of just a facility, any change to the school, but you mentioned a hallway and I'm a bit
Yeah,
confused.
Soddy Elementary has their hallways named,
Okay. Any,
so any change,
I-
a field name, a hallway, a school color, a mascot, anything should come before us. That's my suggestion.
Jill?
I just need clarification around, most of the elementary schools in my district use, houses for disciplinary, and y'all are nodding because y'all know. When a kid does something right, they earn a token, and they're sorted by houses, and the houses are named all different kinds of things. At Battle, they're named after different rocket missions because they're the Battle rockets. And there's like a behavioral competition. Is that policy, could someone interpret this policy to affect that?
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna press. I think it's a permanent change of, name to a facility,
Yeah.
name to a hallway, because you do have some schools that it'll be the Challenger hallway one year, and the next year it'll be the Discovery hallway, right? But I just think adding in there like permanent change.
Okay, the Saudi Elementary, that's my example. They are currently called the Lakers, Saudi Lake, Saudi Lakers. I mean, it's pretty well known. They have the Tadpole Hall. They have the Catfish Hall. They have all that, and they got signs up.
Yeah, I think the same recommendation I was gonna have when you started is putting in something around like a permanent change, meaning like you could still do something like this, but you can't change the gym from the Slater gym to the Smith gym, right?
I think what Mr. Ryan, who brought it to us, it was the mascot, right, Steve?
So if you put a permanent change of mascot, hallway,
School colors.
So Shannon, we'll work on that,
Anything
right?
should come before us.
Okay. Moving on. I've had another one brought to me. I don't think everybody has it. Ms. Felice wants to talk about 5.115, assignment and transfer.
Okay.
We don't have a copy.
And because it's late, I just want to just make it kind of brief and maybe no decisions now, but put this in your ear and, get some feedback, just getting your ideas. And I'm just saying, in the matter of transfers, I'm just thinking if there's a need for, say, a reduction in number of employees in a certain department to go to a different school, that there should be some consideration, in my opinion, anyway. I'm suggesting maybe to consider seniority as far as being able to say. I know that our HR has a really good policy really good procedures, and I don't think they're always followed. So I think if we had a policy that maybe it could be followed, as far as considering if this teacher has a leadership role or something, that, at this time, there's some incident where someone, plural, where a teacher or so is involuntarily, I didn't say that right, well, involuntarily being transferred to another school, and other teachers who have not been there as long or doesn't have as much experience are being allowed to stay, while some who have been there for a long time, they have a good record. They're an efficient teacher, and they might even have a leadership position of some kind, maybe department chair. They're being told to leave. They're the ones being cut. And I just feel like if you've been at a school for years and years and you're doing a good job, and you even have a leadership role, that I think you should have some seniority. And that's why there is such a thing as seniority, because that's what a lot of people believe, that should be, you should be given some consideration in that circumstance. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there for now. I don't have anything written up, but I just, that's just a concern I have. And I think there can be exceptions, maybe someone's a coach or something, and that school needs a coach who's a teacher. But anyway, that's just my feeling, what I would like. I would like to have some consideration for seniority.
Gary.
Yeah, so I'll give you another exception that happened. So when we had the adult high school, numbers were in the 200s. They dropped to 150. I had 3 math teachers. I had to drop to 2 math teachers. The math teacher that had been there from day one that the school started, but was certified in statistics, but not certified in Algebra 2, she had to leave, even though there was a teacher there that had only been there for 3 years. She had been there 15 years. And because that teacher was endorsed in what we needed at that school, we had to keep those other 2 teachers, and this teacher had to leave. So there's always exceptions. I'm glad you mentioned the coaching one, because that's an administrator's, prerogative, that if you provide added duties to a position, then, that person should also.
Scott,
Yes, ma'am.
is that something we can put in a policy?
Well, that's a good question. The policy language says that transfers shall be non-discriminatory and shall not be arbitrary or capricious. The code gives the director broad authority to make transfers based upon the efficient operation of the schools, but it also provides that transfers shall be acted on in accordance with board policy. So there's an assumption that the board has some latitude here. Now, in application, what this board and most boards traditionally do is they give time frames. So for instance, if you're going to transfer someone, you give them a certain amount of notice before the transfer. If it's an involuntary transfer, historically, I think we give them 10 days. If you look in this policy, generally we let them know before June 15th. The problem that you run into, the reason this board has exercised a great deal of discretion over the years is because, as Mr. King was pointing out, it can be extraordinarily difficult as you're trying to assess the needs of a school. And that's why this board has leaned into this language: transfers shall be non-discriminatory and shall not be arbitrary or capricious. Generally speaking, if an employee has grieved a transfer, as long as the administration has a facially valid reason, this board has let it go. So it's the sort of thing where, could you do it? I would have to advise the board to be cautious because of the director's authority to run the school system. My belief would be that if there is an abuse of this, that's why you have a grievance policy. That would be my.
Okay, then maybe someone should file a grievance if they deem that their transferring is because of some other reason.
Arbitrary or capricious.
And capricious, but how do you prove that? It can be hard, but
Sure.
But as far as having the same certifications or even higher level, it just seems like it is capricious if you don't consider that employee and all when they do have all the certifications. They've been there forever, and have a good record.
And so the more I've thought about this, the more I think that would be an argument. So if you have 2 employees who are otherwise similarly situated, they have similar evaluations, similar duties, similar identical certifications, and the difference is this person is senior and this person's brand new and this person's the one being moved. Well, nothing else appearing, that might look a little strange. And so if there's a grievance, well, Mr. Director, what's the rationale for this? The rationale might be, well, as a matter of fact, this person is more senior and I need to reorganize the department over at this other school because this other school needs revitalization. It might be that the transfer, though involuntary, is for the efficient operation of that school. It opens a can of worms. I'm not saying that we couldn't craft something, but my concern would be anything that we do that treads on the director's ability to assign staff with efficient operation of the school system becomes very difficult. I'll use as a for instance. Imagine the work that lies ahead as we look at reconfiguring, potentially reconfiguring the East Hamilton staffing situation. There definitely could be some moves of personnel as you figure out the different grade bands for the schools. Someone might say, I don't want to leave this school, it's 3 minutes from my house. Well, those transfers can't be arbitrary, can't be capricious. And so the question revolves around, is there an efficient operation of the school argument in support of the decision? If there is, historically, we don't look past that because of the authority that's been given to the director. Before we would do anything, I would really want to talk with the superintendent and HR and work through the permutations of this, because quite frankly, the General Assembly for the last several years has tried to give the administration and the board more authority to make these changes rather than less. Now, I'm not saying that your concerns don't have merit, but I think that there are probably other avenues already within board policy to address those. So I think maybe that's where we need to flesh this out.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nothing else coming before the board? We are adjourned, and there's bad weather I hear coming.